This is the story of a great sea battle between England and Spain, which happened 400 years ago. The battle took place out there in the English Channel. In the year 1588, the most powerful country there had ever been was Spain. For years, Spanish and Portuguese sailors had explored the world and discovered many new lands. They brought back to Spain lots of gold and silver and expensive spices. The English were jealous of the Spaniards, and frequently they attacked the Spanish ships and seized their treasure. What made things worse was that Spain was a Catholic country, while England was Protestant. This is Buckland Abbey in Devon. Once upon a time it was a Catholic monastery, but when England became a Protestant country, it was turned into a private house. In the year 1588, it was the home of Sir Francis Drake, one of the English seamen who fought against Spain. Children from 2 local schools have been acting out the story of the Armada in some of the rooms of the house.
This is Philip II, the King of Spain. He is the most powerful man in the whole world.
He is a man with a great decision to make.
As usual, his councillors are full of advice. The big question is this: should Spain invade England or not?
Well?
Sire, the English continue to attack our ships and steal our treasure.
They have murdered the Catholic Queen of Scotland. They must be punished.
After much thought, King Philip decides to send an invasion force against England.
How many ships will we need? Hundreds. How many men?
He calls a council of war and orders ships from all corners of his empire to gather here at Lisbon. This then is the Spanish Armada, which will sail up the English Channel to meet up with the Duke of Parma.
What happens then? They will try to get to England to attack.
In the Spanish Netherlands, the country we now call Holland, the Duke of Parma has collected a huge army. While the Armada keeps the English Navy well away, the army will be transported in barges across the Channel to Kent. As the English only have a small army, the Duke of Parma will then march unopposed to London. Once again, England will become a Catholic country, and the Protestant Queen Elizabeth will be imprisoned in the Tower of London. Elizabeth I, the Queen of England, was a clever woman. She knew that war with Spain could not be avoided forever. She guessed that Spain might attack at any time. She, too, took advice from her councillors.
Well, my lords?
Madam, your forts must be strengthened and re-equipped.
The local militia must be called up and training begun. Your ships must be brought together and repaired with all haste.
Your Majesty, I recommend that a series of beacons are placed on the high points all along the south coast. And when the enemy are first sighted, the beacons shall be lit, so that the earliest possible warning is given of their approach.
This is Father's job.
Will he cook fish for your supper and build bonfires, can he?
I don't think the Spanish will ever come. They'll come all right.
And we must be ready to light the beacon. They say there's one Spanish ship that's loaded full of rope.
Full of rope? Why is that? To hang every Englishman that won't become a Catholic.
In Lisbon, work began on getting the Armada ready. Hundreds of ships had to be prepared for the journey. Thousands of guns had to be made. Great supplies of gunpowder and cannonballs had to be collected. Food was brought from all over the country and packed into casks made of new wood. 8,000 sailors gathered from all over Europe. 20,000 soldiers were recruited. And 180 priests joined the Armada to persuade the Protestant English to return to the Catholic faith. The man appointed to be in charge of the Armada was the Duke of Medina Sidonia. He wrote a letter to King Philip asking to be excused from the job.
Sire, my health is poor. I am always seasick. I have lots of debts and can't spare any of my own money. I have no experience of the sea or war. Therefore, I shan't know if I'm getting good advice or bad. There are much better men for this job than I.
King Philip replied,
If you fail, you fail. In the meantime, God will help you to do your best.
In May 1588, the Armada was all ready to sail. First came the great Portuguese galleons. Then came the galleasses from Naples in Italy. These ships were powered by sails and oars pulled by hundreds of slaves. Then came armed merchant ships and a hospital ship, the St. Peter the Great. In all, 130 ships sailed down the River Tagus and out into the Atlantic Ocean. Meanwhile, on the cliff tops of England, people watched and waited.
They'll not come. They'll come all right.
Father says that one of the ships carries nothing but firebrands.
What they want with them? To burn the cheeks of every little English child like you.
Slowly, the Armada sailed on towards England. It was said that the sea groaned beneath the weight of the ships. On July the 29th, the Spanish Armada came in sight of the Cornish cliffs, and the first of the warning beacons was lit. Immediately, the signal fires spread eastwards.
I think they'll never come. Look over there! I can't see anything. On the hill, stupid! They fired their beacons! The Armada! It's burning, it's burning! Keep it going! Don't let me go out!
Each blazing beacon was the signal for the next fire in the chain to be lit.
Have they seen it? Have they seen it? Yes, they've seen it. Look. Look.
Another one's gone up!
Oh, yes.
That will be pleased!
The news that the Armada was coming spread quickly across the country. One by one, the signal beacons burst into flames. The news spread faster than a horseman could ride. London knew by morning, and so did Nottingham, York and Durham. In towns and villages along the south coast, men gathered and armed themselves. The Spaniards were coming. As they sailed up the channel, the Spanish captains argued about whether or not they should attack the English navy in Plymouth.
If we attack now, we can destroy the English ships while they're trapped by the tide.
If we can destroy the English fleet, nothing can stop us. This opportunity will not happen again. We must act.
Gentlemen,
We must act.
the King's orders are clear. Nothing must distract us. We must sail on up the English Channel and meet up with the Duke of Parma's army.
As the Armada sailed on, the English fleet came out of Plymouth Harbour and fell in behind the Spanish ships. The following day, the fighting began. And so the battle continued up the channel, past the Isle of Wight. Further east in Kent, Queen Elizabeth gathered her little army around her and prepared to meet the Spanish invasion force. On Saturday, the 6th of August, the Armada anchored off the French coast near Calais. They were now just a few miles from the Duke of Parma at Dunkirk and his great army. Medina Sidonia was anxious for news of the Duke of Parma. Early on Sunday morning, his messengers returned.
Well, gentlemen,
The Duke of Parma sends his apologies, but his army isn't ready.
He's hardly enough barges for his men.
And there is worse news. The water around Dunkirk is too shallow for our ships.
If he sets out in barges, he'll be attacked by the rebel Dutchmen. Before they can reach the protection of our fleet, the army will be destroyed.
Less than a mile away, the English captains plot further problems for the Spanish admiral.
They are like sitting ducks.
the wind blows most to them.
We must get 8 old merchant ships and fill them up with brushwood, straw,
And plenty of pitch.
load their cannons with double charges of gunpowder,
And when the tide turns to midnight, we set them alight.
and cut them adrift, and let the flames do the rest.
Fire ships. The Spaniards were expecting them and tried to tow them away from their fleet. But 6 managed to break through. The cannons on the fire ships grew so hot that they went off by themselves. The Spaniards were afraid the ships were loaded with gunpowder, which would cause an even bigger explosion. In the panic to escape, the Spanish ships slipped their anchors and raised their sails. The wind blew them east, past the Netherlands and the Duke of Parma's army. There was little chance now of the meeting ever being made. On they sailed as the sun rose. The battle reached its final stages in the North Sea. Both sides were now short of ammunition and could fight no longer. While the English fleet returned to port, the Armada had to find its way home round the north of Scotland and past the west coast of Ireland. Throughout the long journey home, the weather was wild and stormy. Many of the ships were badly damaged and leaking. Disaster was about to overtake King Philip's mighty Armada. On board all the ships, the conditions in which the soldiers and sailors had to live were terrible.
There are 80 soldiers and 20 sailors who are sick.
Every day, 4 or 5 die of hunger and thirst. Yet this ship was one of the best supplied with food.
There is nothing left but 25 pints of wine and very little bread.
Our meat is rotten. The water which we brought from Spain stinks to heaven and can't be drunk.
The common soldiers say that if they ever return home to Spain, they will never again meddle with the English.
And many men did not return home to Spain. Of the 130 ships which set out from Lisbon, more than 60 were lost. Many of them were wrecked on the coasts of Scotland and Ireland. Thousands of soldiers and sailors were drowned. Some were washed up alive, only to have their brains knocked out by the local inhabitants. Others were caught by the English authorities, put in prison, and hanged. Back in England, the people celebrated their victory. Church bells rang and bonfires blazed.
In all their sailing about England, the dreadful navy of Spain didn't manage to sink a single ship of ours.
And their army never bound so much as a barn or a sheepcote.
God breathed and they were scattered.
King Philip was quite calm when he heard the news of the defeat of the Armada. He did not blame the Duke of Medina Sidonia, but thanked him for his help.
Thank you. You did your best.
King Philip never gave up his plan of invading England, but he was never again able to assemble so great an armada. To celebrate her victory, Queen Elizabeth had a new portrait painted. In one corner, it showed her own gallant ships sailing before the wind. In the other, the destruction of the Armada. In October 1588, the Spanish hospital ship, the St. Peter the Great, was wrecked not far from Bolt Tail in South Devon. She had survived the journey round Scotland and Ireland, but was too damaged and waterlogged to reach home. The local villagers stripped the ship of her possessions before she broke up in the waves. The men on board were taken prisoner, and a list was made of their names. Among them was a Portuguese boy called George. No one knows what became of George, or whether he ever saw his home again.
Silly, you wouldn't understand us.
God breathed and they were scattered.
The next programme in the Landmark series will be in 2 weeks' time.